Well, hello everyone. I think somehow our intro got dropped off this week, so no second act show a fancy intro. It's just Carrie and me doing it old school. And so I'm John Tarnoff.
I'm Carrie
and,
Hannon.
and yes, and we are the Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire of second act careers this week. I thought that was kind of dignified and romantic. So before we get into our very exciting guest, Carrie has an announcement, and we need to just talk about Carrie's new book.
Well, thank you, John. My book, In Control at 50 Plus, How to Succeed in the New World of Work, came out last week. McGraw-Hill is my publisher. I'm super excited about it. And I really dig into the 5 major trends I see coming out of the pandemic that have fundamentally changed our workplace for workers over 50 and in many ways for everyone. And so it's really been a terrific opportunity to showcase some of this material. I encourage everyone to take a look. Some of our good friends are in the book. You are in the book. Bradley blurbed it for me. So, it's really like an old home week. And the trends that people can read about are some very obvious ones: remote work, contract work, entrepreneurship, career transition, and education, learning, virtual learning, all of those trends which started pre-pandemic, but just lit up after the pandemic. So down the road, we can talk more about it. But in the meantime, thanks for letting me do my little song and dance in my elevator pitch.
Absolutely. And talk about post-pandemic. That's a really good segue into bringing on our guest, Bradley Schurman. So I'm going to bring him on. And hey, Bradley.
Hey, how are you?
Doing really well. And yes, and Carrie's holding up your book, The Super Age.
Yay. Let me get it.
Thank you.
There we are.
You know, I tell you, if you're Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, I must be Groucho Marx.
That's good. I would take that. I think that's
somebody needs to be, right?
Exactly. Someone needs to be Groucho. So thank you so much, Bradley, for coming on to the show. And let me do the little intro on you. So everyone, Bradley is the founder and CEO of the Super Age, a research and advisory firm specializing in helping organizations understand the challenges and harness the opportunities of demographic change, with a focus on population aging. He is also the author of this wonderful book, which Sherry just showed us, Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny. You should all pick it up. So Bradley speaks about how demographic change is disrupting social, political, and economic norms. His deep understanding of population shifts, coupled with his grasp of emerging trends, make him an invaluable asset for any organization or individual interested in garnering insights into the future of everything in our aging world. So with that said, let us get into our conversation today.
And I got to start just by saying this, Bradley. What the heck is the Super Age? Please tell everybody what you're talking about.
That is the magic question, Carrie. The Super Age is a novel period for humanity where at least 1 out of 5 people will be over the age of 65. And that's already happened in a number of countries throughout the world, including Japan, where nearly 1 out of 3 people are already over the age of 65. And it's happening across the United States at a pretty fast pace. In fact, 1/3 of all U.S. counties meet this designation, and 5 U.S. states. By the end of this decade, the U.S. will be part of this club, the entire country. And believe it or not, by 2034, over 65s will actually outnumber under 18s.
So have we knocked over the pyramid?
We have almost knocked over the pyramid. Fortunately, there is a bit of transition. And the pyramid Carrie's referring to is a population pyramid, which historically had large numbers of young people at the bottom and very few older people at the top. What's happened over the course of the last century is that those sides have really squared off. And in some cases, like Japan, like China, they're starting to invert. And this is really going to remake most of what we know about the world today and into tomorrow.
So why is it that this is, I mean, are we so at the beginning of this that people don't understand this? I feel like this has been going on for a while, and that there is a tremendous amount of resistance to this change, denial of this change out there. And one example of this, and you talk about this in your book, is that corporate leaders, CEOs, are older. They're 45 to 60 and older. And yet many of their companies are persisting in ageist hiring policies, I mean, the case of IBM, very famously, forcing people out into
Mhm.
consulting roles and then firing them, and in favor of bringing in millennial employees. Um, just because there was this kind of race to the top or the bottom or the middle around having younger employees, because that was supposedly a good idea. So, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's very simple. You know, we've been aging as a society since the 1760s. That's when it really started at the advent of the first industrial revolution. But it wasn't until recently that things really sped up and we saw the intersection of increased longevity really collide with decreasing birth rates. So it's really only been about 25 years that things have really gotten hot and heavy. But it's a bit like the apologue of the frog in the pot. If you put it in cold and turn the heat on, the frog will likely die in the pot. But if you throw a frog into a boiling pot of water, it'll likely jump out. For most of our executives, they've grown up in a world that's looked very young. And in fact, they've had access to incredibly large numbers of cheap labor. So, of course, they're not looking at the world the way we do as experts. They're looking at the way the world used to be. To make that even worse, most of us look at ourselves as a good 10 to even 20 years younger than we actually are. We have this weird mismatch between our mental age and our physical age. And that compounds in the workplace. So these CEOs that are 45, 55, 65 probably see themselves as at least a decade younger than they actually are. So they look at older people, people who present as old, as actually old and a problem from the workforce, where they see
So they don't
themselves
think
as
that they
actually a
don't think of
solution.
themselves as old, right? Right.
Yeah, yeah. So
Um,
it's a bit of a psychological switch there.
But the thing
let me
is,
just real
Bradley,
quick.
it's so buzzy, diversity in the workplace. Everyone's starting special, departments at work to talk about this, and they're hiring diversity executives. Why is ageism not part of that,
It's
or
relatively
AIDS?
new. It's relatively new.
Yeah.
We've been dealing with race in the workforce for since the 1950s. We've been dealing with gender in the workforce at least since the 1960s and 1970s in a meaningful way. And we've really only recently dealt with sexuality and gender identity in the workforce. Age has been around for a long time, and our attitudes towards older populations, especially older workers, really tend to ebb and flow depending on market needs. In fact, in the 1950s, labor force participation rates for older workers, men over the age of 65, was nearing 50%. It's only 20% today. So we're getting out of this. We're breaking free from this idea that older people aren't valuable and looking at it in an era where older people will be essential to the full functioning of our economy.
it's interesting you talk about that. I kind of missed that, and you brought that back in the book. This idea that that as we got into the 1960s, advertising and lifestyle kind of tended to promote this idea of retirement in a way that had never really been done before, never really been marketed or industrialized in the way that it had.
Mhm.
So we're
Yeah. Well,
obviously
I mean,
moving back.
you have any time there's a lurch forward in society where we establish new markets or new markets and new customer groups emerge, there are people there to profiteer on them or at least kind of stake out what they should look like. And in the 1950s and 1960s, there were two distinct groups of people. Those folks that were staking out what retirement looked like, and those people who were staking out what teenagers looked like. And they were very successful at both. So our idea of teenage years or adolescent years is relatively fixed. We have this idealized version of it. We know that's not the case. We also have this idealized version of retirement and what it should look like. And 9 times out of 10, it's a white couple walking down a beach.
Right, right.
So we have this kind of fixed idea of what retirement is that doesn't jive with the modern reality. In fact, it may never have really jived with reality at all.
So let me just jump in here, Carrie. I know you want to ask a question, but the other thing that you talk about in the book, which I found completely shocking, was this idea of the the number of people in the workforce and in the population at large who have kids in the home and who don't have kids in the home. And I certainly have had this feeling for a while that the bulk of the workforce is families with kids at various stages, young, middle, older, high school, whatever, but that the number of people with no kids in the house is outlier. It's on the fringes. It's the older and the younger employees. In fact, as you point out, it's entirely the reverse. So I'd love for you to talk about that and how that impacts policy and corporate behavior.
Yeah, most of our workforce policies, certainly around compensation and benefits, are built around a nuclear family model. And can you imagine anything more outdated than that today? The nuclear family is only really reserved for the rich anymore. The modern workforce is very diverse. And because of that, because people are staying in the workforce for longer periods of time, have perhaps differing needs, businesses, especially CHROs, Chief Human Resource Officers, are really rethinking what the benefits and compensation packages look like for their workers, because parental leave alone doesn't do it anymore. So you're starting to see a lot of workplaces embrace this idea of caregiving leave, but they're going to push well past this soon. In fact, there are companies in Australia that offer grandparent leave, which I think is remarkable and really cool. But there are also companies across the United Kingdom that are offering menopausal leave for women right now because they want to retain them in the workforce. They see older women in particular as an essential ingredient to their success.
But kids only represent families with kids only represent 25% of the population, of the working population, right? That's a shocking statistic. So we're funneling all of this effort, for the most part, on a minority of our workforce.
That's one way to put it, for sure. It's also, I think, if I can be perfectly frank, a degree of laziness.
Please, that's what this show is for. We're supposed to be provocative here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a degree of laziness. CHROs in particular, but also CEOs, let's be clear, got very comfortable with a glut of labor. Remember, over the course of the past 100 years, our global population has quadrupled. That's a lot of people to do a lot of jobs, to buy a lot of products. Guess what's happening now? Our populations are slowing in growth. In some cases, they're contracting. So all of a sudden, businesses need to start being creative, really creative in how they approach their workforce and their consumers to meet this new demographic reality. In fact, most of the Americas will really stop growing in the coming years. Almost all of Asia will do the same, and Europe is already, to a large degree, in decline. The only real growth areas we'll see in terms of really large numbers of young people being born are in sub-Saharan Africa, a small handful of Asian countries, and maybe a smattering of Latin American ones.
So, Bradley, like you just said, is we do not have a growing workforce. I mean, that is global. It's not just here in the US. And what I'm curious about is I would like to hear some positive stories about, what companies are really embracing this. And I think we have a camera issue there. Is that?
Yeah. Well, your camera.
We do. I'm sorry. We seem to have disconnected. So apologies for that.
Come back to it, please. I'd love to hear just a positive, like who out there, I know in the book you have some good examples, but maybe you have new ones since then, even of companies that get it, like that are understanding how to retain their older workforce and appreciate them and value them. What kinds of things can other companies learn?
Yeah, so I think with most companies that see older workers as a real value to them and an important part of their workforce, they focus on, first of all, competing for them, giving them the value that they want back in terms of purpose, in terms of compensation. But they're also looking at giving these older workers tools, tools to do the job, and of course, tools to work in a generationally diverse environment. They're constantly supporting their workers through flexible leave, caregiving, et cetera. And they're really investing in the older workers by extending working lives. And they do that through typically ergonomics and education. So they build a relationship with their workers that I think is far more holistic, far more meaningful, and therefore creates a greater loyalty from the older worker to the younger worker and to the company at large. I will say that one thing that I'm constantly impressed by with companies are those companies that give people real flexibility, not just can I work from home 1 or 2 days a week, But companies like UPS that have an ambassadors program, so you can actually retire and then unretire during holiday season and come back and do some work, deliver some packages, work within the company during peak periods. That's the kind of cool things, innovative things companies can do. CVS does something similar with its snowbirds, and they actually allow people who are pharmacists in the north to become pharmacists in the south during the cold months. These are all very kind of simple solutions that engender incredible loyalty to between the business and their workers. And there's some things that more companies really should be looking at.
Is there I mean, maybe you're working on this, but is there some resource that older workers can access to learn more about these kinds of innovative programs, or access ways and suggestions for them to bring some of these programs to the attention of their own companies?
Yeah, there certainly are. I mean, there obviously are some resources within AARP. They have an age-friendly employer program that the people can sign up for, and that gives you at least a sense of which companies, at least in name, are committed to hiring, recruiting, retaining older workers. There's the Age-Friendly Institute in Massachusetts has a list of employers that are deemed to be age-friendly, that actually have innovative practices that are working to recruit and retain older workers. But on the whole, there aren't great resources out there. And there are very few organizations that are making those critical investments to this important demographic. You kind of have to find out by word of mouth. You have to find out, through organizations like Milken that occasionally report on these things, or even the news media at large. But otherwise, people are really flying blind, especially as it relates to finding a company that's going to value them as an individual and really reward their work and their investment in that organization.
And Bradley, that really taps into the idea of your network, right? I mean, you're not going to get a job, truthfully, through a job board or a blind submission. It's really who you know at a company that can give you that inside scoop, right? They can kind of let you know if they're about your age, whether there is a good environment there, there is, opportunity to continue to learn and have phased retirement or flexible schedules.
Yeah, there's nothing that beats your own network. And I think it's important. I walk the talk. It's important to keep a network that is both your immediate age peer, but also people that are older than you and people that are younger than you. I can't tell you how many older workers have said, if it wasn't for my younger cohort of friends, of colleagues, I wouldn't be in a job today. And that to me says a lot about the power of networks and also the power of experience. If you build a network that values you for your contributions and looks past your age or celebrates your age and your contributions, these people are going to really stand up for you when jobs open up. And that's still the best way to get into a job today, is through word of mouth.
So I'm sure John wants to ask you a question right now, but there's one thing I really think, just, you don't have to go long, but just tell the audience why this topic for you. What brings your passion to this topic? And I mean, I think it's really apparent that you care deeply about this issue, but why? I mean, how did that, why?
I, like anybody, I got into aging, I think, in large part because I was experiencing it personally. My grandfather was really my northern light in getting involved in the space. But my God, this is the most transformative thing happening to humans right now. The most transformative thing happening to our economy perhaps ever. Who wouldn't want to be dead center in this? I mean, it's just transformative. So I get up every morning excited about the prospect of working with people, working with organizations, big and small, to help them meet the challenges and the opportunities of this new era.
And what's cool is you've been all over the world looking at these different businesses, not just in the U.S.
Correct. All over, from Japan and Korea, across Europe, and even into Latin America. So one thing that people should note is that this is universal. This is happening nearly everywhere, except for those few places that I mentioned early on, including sub-Saharan Africa.
I want to bring in a question from LinkedIn. Lynn Friest asks, Are companies still focused on efficiency and faster, better, cheaper?
Of course they are. Why wouldn't they be?
I guess
I
the
mean,
implication
they
is,
have
does that,
they
does that
have quarterly
fuel the-
they have quarterly measures that they have to make. So better, faster, cheaper is still a very important tenet of getting work done. Until we turn that kind of notion around, will we really embrace, that slow work, that slow approach that actually builds greater quality in a product? That's TBD. But are companies starting to see the value of experience at the workplace? Of course they are. They're also starting to see the value of engaging an older worker for perhaps longer periods of time. In fact, some of the leading auto manufacturers in Europe, in Germany in particular, are really looking at extending working lives, and it's building into their products, is actually making their products much, much better than they ever have been. So that's something to get really excited about. It's not going to be just about efficiencies. In the long term, it's going to be about building something better that people can use in a more effective way.
You were talking before we got on the call about a conference that you were just attending with human resource executives.
Yeah.
So tell us about that and about how they're viewing this issue and the future. And are companies beginning to pivot and prepare for this? And back to the question of what are the resources that workers can have, is HR beginning to do any leadership in this area?
Yeah, HR is aware. The Great Resignation has been that cowbell that won't stop ringing, month on month. 4+ million people leaving jobs, twice as many jobs available for people who are looking for them. I mean, it's really a remarkable period for this country, and it's not really limited to our shores either. And that's something people should make note of. I met with this group of 30 of the top compensation and benefits managers within American companies over the past week in California at Half Moon Bay at the conference board meeting. And consistently across the board, the response was, we knew there was a problem. We didn't realize it was this. They didn't realize it was the demographics. It was the demographics time and time again. And they had not seen, again, they're not experts in populations. They shouldn't be. They're experts in benefits and what people want and need in the workplace. They didn't see that after the millennials, there's basically a cliff and there's no one coming. There's no cavalry coming to save the American workforce. We're year on year for about 25 years of contraction in birth rates. It's not going to turn around. It can't be solved by immigration. So it's going to have to be solved by finding efficiencies. So that's why I wanted to make sure that point was answered in a bit of an eloquent way, finding efficiencies in the system. And that can be done with technology, but also by engaging people for longer periods of time. People do need to work longer. It's better for your pocketbook and it's better for your health, period. But not just the health of the individual, it's better for the health of the entire economy. Companies need people buying products and services, period. If you're not working and on a fixed income, especially during a period of recession, you are not buying products and services. So, I'm sorry, inflation, not recession, inflation. So with that being said, it's a good deal to keep people in the workforce for as long as we can.
I'm so glad you said you were talking about that, Bradley, but it was so important with this last bit you just said about staying working longer is where, we tend to blame it on the companies. Oh, they don't value the older worker, they kick you out and stuff. But you know what? I personally think as we get older, we have been given that message our whole life that we don't need to continue working past a certain thing. So we stop adding value to ourselves. So I think a role that you can play, I play, John plays, is getting people to focus earlier on, like get with it. Don't blame it all on your boss. You have to have some responsibility here. And you have one of my favorite lines. Maybe I'll have to tease it to you, but I think you know what it is.
if you ain't learning, you ain't earning.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think and I want to be very careful about how this is received. I don't want people to receive this the wrong way, but we've gotten into a really bad rut of blaming everything on ageism. There is no doubt that ageism is pervasive. Ageism is ugly. It is largely focused on women. through lookism, what we call gendered ageism. But make no mistake, not everything is ageism, period. Like sometimes you're just not good at your job. So we have to, as individuals, as employees, really compete for our lifetime. The second you lose that curiosity, Carrie, we share this passion for curiosity.
Yep.
The second you lose that curiosity, you've lost the game. You might as well consider hanging it up, because if you don't hang it up and if you don't upskill and find a way to get back and connected to life and to work, somebody's going to push you out.
See, I think that's,
and it's not going to be because of your age. It's not going to be because of your age. It's because you got lazy.
Yeah, you got to own it sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I clipped an article today that talks about this, about a case of age discrimination that was brought here in Southern California, where an employee felt that they had been passed over for 4 jobs internally. Turns out that 3 out of the 4 jobs, the court found that this person was not more qualified, that the other people internally who were younger were more qualified than she was for the job. But in the 4th case, they found that she was more qualified, and they were discriminating against her. So it's a really interesting, nuanced situation that we're facing.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the law is fairly clear on it, what age discrimination is, but it is very hard to prove. So if you really do believe you have a case, you have to really document more than anything else. But I would look to yourself, towards yourself first, and see what you might be able to do more to differentiate yourselves in the marketplace. We are at a unique period in American history, certainly in the history of the American economy, where really anyone can have a job if they wanted one. If you're struggling because of your age, look at ways to differentiate yourself as much as possible, but also understand that ageism exists. So it's like, be aware, but also be active in your pursuits. Look at ways that you're going to have to challenge it, because it might be a reality from time to time.
Great point. And Carrie, unless you have another question, I think this is a good place to leave it.
Could I just say one thing? I'd like Bradley to just tell us what's the biggest takeaway from your book that you want the listeners to hold on to.
If you are not on this train right now, if you are not paying attention to the demographic shift that we are in, you've missed the boat. I mean, this is a really unique period, and the amount of change that we can expect in our daily lives in the next 5 and 10 years will be nothing short of transformative. It's exciting. It's scary. We're in the midst of an industrial revolution at the same time, this information age. Pay attention, stay sharp, stay engaged, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. But at the end, we're most likely going to have a more unified and more generationally diverse society that respects people. And I hope an economy that values a larger number of people as well.
Thanks.
Well said. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, before we go, I just want to bring up on the screen our next show, which is going to be in 2 weeks. We have the wonderful Marcy Albaher from encore.org, who's a great friend of Carrie's and mine, who's going to talk about intergenerational collaboration and cooperation. So stay tuned for that show. And in the interim, any pearls of wisdom from either Carrie or Bradley, our Washington D.C. denizens?
Well, as I say at the end of the book, the future may look gray, but it is incredibly bright. There is so much opportunity in this period. Tap into it. We got a lot to do.
Oh, I love it. I think you end on that note, John. That's perfect.
Absolutely. There we are. All right, guys. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you, Bradley, for being with us today. It was a great conversation.
Thanks,
Good seeing you both. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.